Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to the January 5th, 2018 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us for the very first show of 2018. Let's get a quick take on Meow Wolf, a Santa Fe-based art exhibition announcing that Denver will be the next home for its $50 million, five-story, 90,000 square foot home. The space is set to open in 2020 near Mile High Stadium, with tickets already being sold for the first week. Patty Calhoun of Westward, you and Westward are the home of everything cool. So please enlighten us of the much less cool, like myself. What the heck is Meow Wolf?
Meow Wolf is indeed cool. So 10 years ago, a cooperative in Santa Fe started the way most of them do, on a shoestring. They did some art. What jet propelled them is 3 years ago, George R.R. Martin, Game of Thrones, bought an old bowling alley in Santa Fe, which allowed them to create this huge immersive art installation. And it's been such a hit there that they're first coming to Denver, where they're going to have a brand new building built for them, right in the heart of that gritty corner between Auraria Parkway and the Platte and I-25. And they're building something 3 times as big as in Santa Fe. And it is just going to be an amazing immersive art exhibit, permanent, that employs hundreds of Denver artists, we hope.
We certainly do. David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. What do you make of this big announcement? We're still trying to figure out what it is. This sounds like a good thing for a good part of Denver. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was surprised. It's near Mile High Stadium, so I thought the Meow was going to be actually the Broncos being renamed for more truth in advertising.
That is well done, David.
I don't know anything about it other than what Patty says, and she always tells the truth. So it sounds like it's going to be great. You know, we've spent a lot of time last year talking about gentrification and increased housing prices, well, which makes it harder for some people to afford housing. This is the other side of it. You have a dynamic, vibrant, growing city that people want to come to. It's going to increase the entertainment, give more jobs to artists, and of course it's going to further drive up housing prices because we'll have more people living here and real estate will be more expensive. You can't have one without the other.
Eric Sonman, political analyst, you are always up on the cool stuff. Do you have one of the advance tickets?
I do not have one of the advance tickets, and you have a very wrong perception of me. I defer to Patty, as do you, for my cool advice or cool analysis. So I know little about this as well. I think Patty will be at opening day. Somehow I think that David and I will, those invites will get lost in the mail. David's comments about gentrification are on the mark. I noted that the announcement came on the same day as the stock show parade and the opening of the stock show, and it struck me as a juxtaposition of old Denver and new Denver, what Denver's been historically and what Denver is becoming.
It sounds like our invitation is probably to more of a bark tiger rather than Meow Wolf. So I get your point. Ed Seelever from the Denver Business Journal joins us. Ed, business-wise, is this a big deal for Denver?
Yeah, it's a big deal. This could be a new tourist attraction for Denver, and I think it's significant. Our sister paper in Albuquerque Business First, reported a year ago they were looking at Las Vegas, Denver, and Austin for possible expansion, but they said yesterday that Denver officials and Denver residents really put the city ahead of the others. I think it speaks well for Denver's ability to draw in tourists and artists.
U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions pulled the plug on the Cole and Ogden marijuana memos on Thursday, which sparked a firestorm of responses in Colorado. Governor Hickenlooper and Attorney General Cynthia Kaufman both issued statements reassuring the cannabis industry that they will continue protecting law-abiding Coloradans. And Senator Cory Gardner made national news with his criticisms of the Justice Department from the Senate floor. Patty, was Westward at DEF CON 1 yesterday with this announcement?
Oh, it was. The siren sounded immediately. And we were looking at every comment. Every single congressional rep weighed in immediately. The senators weighed in immediately, which is good because for Colorado, this is a states' right issue. We've got a business that marijuana has been legal here for 4 years now with relatively few problems and a lot of cash coming into the coffers. It was a state amendment to our ballot to legalize it, and now for the feds to say, I mean, these memos essentially said under the Obama era that federal prosecutors would not be prosecuting in states where businesses in legal marijuana states unless they were breaking laws in those states too, but it would be a low priority. This removes all that. No one really knows what's going to happen, whether or not they'll just be going after bad actors or they'll be popping people who just happen to have an ounce of pot on them, which is what concerns a lot of people. We'll see it shake out, but Cory Gardner really he gave a rousing speech yesterday morning because during the confirmation hearings for Jeff Sessions, he had specifically asked if Sessions planned to allow states that were exercising states' rights and had legalized marijuana, whether he would leave them alone, and he said he would. And now, obviously, this does not. So Gardner, if you listen to that speech, it was a great impassioned speech where he threatened to hold up all new justice nominees too. So good for Gardner on that.
David, you are our esteemed lawyer at the table, and there's a couple different confusing legal things here for, I think, the average folks. I'm going to put myself in that group. When you hear a U.S. Attorney General and a memo, and then you hear a U.S. Attorney in Colorado saying, well, we're really not going to do anything different, and then you have other state officials here, how should the average Coloradan perceive legally what we're hearing from this announcement?
Unfortunately, the state of our current law is if the feds want to persecute marijuana businesses or users, they can. The most recent precedent is the Raich versus Gonzalez case from the Supreme Court earlier this century, where 6-3 the court said that Angel Raich, who had an illness that would be fatal without consumption of medical marijuana and was consuming medical marijuana, was non-commercially grown, no commercial transaction ever took place, wholly within the state of California, that somehow Congress's power to regulate commerce among the several states can be extended so far as to go to purely non-commercial activity that occurs only in one state. That's the basis of a lot of bad federal laws on many topics, and the Supreme Court eventually should change its mistaken interpretation on that, but for now, the feds get to win. The good thing is they don't have the resources, fortunately, to go and persecute every user or every person who's growing for personal consumption. But just sending a few threat letters to landlords about invoking the prospect of civil asset forfeiture would probably be enough to mostly shut down the lawful commercial industry in this state. Kudos to all Colorado elected officials who stood up. The vast majority of them voted against the marijuana amendment that was adopted by the people, but on a bipartisan basis, they're doing a great job of unifying behind respecting the will of the people expressed through the Constitution. But as Patty said, Cory Gardner is far above all the rest. Everybody complains about the weather, but not many people do anything about it. Cory Gardner is the only one who is now making Jeff Sessions pay a price for it. He has the ability as a lone senator to put a hold on Department of Justice nominees, and he said he's going to do that. So he brought down the nuclear option, the biggest hammer, and he's the only one of all our Colorado elected officials who's really taken affirmative action to force the Sessions to pay some consequences for his lies during his confirmation hearing.
Eric, I guess I wasn't terribly surprised by hearing the vociferous points made by both Kaufman and Gardner, among other congressional delegations. But is that enough upcoming upcoming elections where the public will separate what's happening in D.C. from our own delegation, or will they want our delegation to pay for what's happening in D.C.?
Don't know fully the answer to that. Gardner doesn't have to face the voters now until 2020. Obviously, Kaufman and other U.S. representatives have to face them this year that we're now entering. I do not have perhaps the same affinity for the explosion of marijuana that some other people in Colorado, that some other people around this table might have, and that's all well and good. I do have an affinity for the concept of states' rights, and that states have that degree of sovereignty, and that the voters of Colorado considered this and passed it, and it wasn't even that narrow of a passage. I have no idea what it means to be a Republican these days, and this is just one issue of many. I thought being a Republican used to mean you supported states' rights and local rights, and you put a priority on them. But that seems, particularly in this Trump administration or Jeff Sessions administration, to be, not a principle, but totally something of convenience. If it's something, if it's a convenient argument to use, they use it. If it's an inconvenient argument to use, they ignore it. So I totally support, whether it's Hickenlooper, Cory Gardner, Cynthia Kaufman, Mike Kaufman, all the rest of them in terms of their statements yesterday. I'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Bob Troyer, the U.S. attorney here at the moment in Colorado, said the right things about this really not being a major factor, and it would be sort of still business as it had been before. But let's not forget, Bob Troyer reports to Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions is his boss, and if there is a new policy coming out of the U.S. Department of Justice, I don't know for how long U.S. attorneys around the country, in Colorado and elsewhere, will just be able to say, oh, never mind.
Ed, this is a huge industry, and I think it opened a lot of people's eyes to see graphics yesterday on the news where nearly 35,000 people work in the marijuana industry in Colorado, comparing that to other industries. I think the only one that's bigger was servers, like waitresses and waiters, at 54,000. You compare that every restaurant in Colorado, there's only 20,000 more people that work versus the marijuana industry. Business-wise, is this making big waves?
It's hard to tell, and one of the reasons it's not seeming to drive people nuts yet is because of what Governor Hickenlooper and A.G. Kaufman came out and said yesterday. It was kind of the nothing to see here, let's move along, business as usual. Hickenlooper had a couple salient points about this. One, for the DOJ to start raiding local pot shops, whether that be here or in other states where they're legal, would imply that the DOJ has a much greater treasure trove of resources than we've ever been led to see. I mean, they're fighting the war on opioids, on heroin. The guess is they're going to continue fighting those, and this will be almost a minor peck in that. The other thing that Hickenlooper made a good point about, he said that now more than half of America lives in a state where some form of marijuana, whether medical or retail, is legalized. And maybe what this does is open up the question to Congress. Should we go beyond letting states decide this, and should we have a federal weigh-in on this? Should we, have something that definitively says, okay, maybe we legalize marijuana, or that we specifically say states can legalize marijuana? So nobody thinks the sky is falling right now, but I think they're worried to see what might come down from the sky.
A proposal to make it illegal to purchase, sell, or possess bump stocks is one step closer to passing in the Denver City Council this week. Introduced by Councilman Rafael Espinoza, the proposal would also cover magazines with 15 rounds or more, and punishment can range from $100 to $999 and jail time of 10 to 180 days. David, you're clearly our gun expert. What do you make of what we're seeing at the Denver City Council?
Well, I testified before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee back in December and said that a device that makes a normal gun fire as fast as a machine gun should be regulated the same as a machine gun. In federal law and in Colorado, which is parasitic on that, there's a very strict licensing and registration and tax system for machine guns. I think bump stocks should be brought into that. I don't think they should be banned. So I don't agree with this Denver proposal, but I will say to Councilman Espinoza's credit, the definition of bump stock that is in that bill is a good and accurate one, unlike the federal bill by Senator Dianne Feinstein, which would ban many, many other things that have nothing to do with bump stocks. And on the magazine ban, obviously I don't agree with that either, but I would say the council has been making some progress in like the committee hearing earlier this week about drafting that ban so it more accurately aligns with state law rather than causing conflicts.
Eric, is this a big deal for the Denver City Council to be proposing something like this?
No, it's not surprising. You have a liberal city council in a liberal city and tackling a liberal issue. So it's not surprising at all. Good for Councilman Espinoza, good for them for tackling it. I don't understand the gun issue, at least the legal piece of it, in any of the depth that David does. But I think, David's point of that regulating bump stocks like machine guns is basically something that, as one of the foremost gun advocates in the country, legal advocates in the country, that even David Kopel is embracing. So this is not completely novel ground. Good for the city council. I'd only note that, the fines here are fairly modest, and if somebody really wants to shoot up a place, somehow I don't think 6 months in jail or $999 is going to be exactly weighing on their mind.
Ed, do you think other cities will take Denver's lead in doing similar proposals?
They may, but here's the one thing about Denver's proposal. It actually technically really does nothing. According to Denver's 1989 assault weapons ban, the weapons that you can attach a bump stock to are already illegal in Denver. So this is taking something and saying, hey, you can't do this, and now you can't attach this to something you can't already do. It's really a statement bill here. I think it may spawn other cities to do this, but in Denver, it's not going to have much of an impact.
Patty, all hat, no cattle?
Well, it's still better than a cat declawing measure. I think this is the kind of social issue that you can see there's a reason for city council to weigh in on, even if it really doesn't do much. And we certainly have talked enough about the ban back from '89 that Denver does have a right to ban some things. It's the home rule issue in Colorado.
The Colorado 2018 legislative session is less than a week away, and what's likely to be a contentious year got even more interesting when it was revealed that the federal tax reform law that recently passed will mean a dramatic increase in state tax revenue to the tune of between $200 and $300 million for Colorado. Eric, the session has yet to start, but we already have headlines. Take your favorite of what you'd like to comment about.
Yeah, I'm going to be quick here because I want to turn the floor over to Ed Seelover, who is covers the Capitol. This is what he does for a living and has a good story in today's Denver Business Journal, and viewers should go read that story, a good all-encompassing preview of the session. The punchline, Ed can speak for himself, is it's not set up for a whole lot to be done, unlike the predecessor session in 2017. I have an interest particularly in the para reform issue. I've worked for para in years way past, and these days I'm leading an advocacy organization trying to call attention to this issue. I will be curious as to whether how it plays in this session. I think every responsible legislator, left, right, Democrat, Republican, understands that this is a ticking time bomb. It needs to be dealt with, but the devil is in the details, and the details are painful. But inaction is even more painful. I quote my old mentor, and then I'll turn it over, former Governor Lamb, and in a Channel 9 interview a year or two ago with Kyle Clark, Dick Lamb was asked, what is the one issue that Colorado is ignoring at its peril? And he had a one-word answer, and that was para. We'll see if it continues to get ignored and the can continues to get kicked down the road.
Ed, as alluded to masterfully by Eric, you are a guy on the Hill. You have a great piece out today at the Denver Business Journal to check out. What do we need to be on the lookout for, and what about this whole great tax revenue boom that's coming to the state of Colorado, probably surprising a lot of Coloradans?
That'll probably cause some more fights. So let's just set this up. Election year sessions are always a little tougher to get things through because people are less willing to budge. They want to make more statements. They want to put them on election cards rather than say, hey, I compromised on this. This year is going to be particularly tough, and here's why. When I talked to Senate President Kevin Grantham and House Speaker Crisanta Duran, I've interviewed them twice over the last 2 weeks, and just gave them the basic question, what are your priorities for the session? You often hear the same issues but attacked from different ways. They're not even talking about the same issues this year. Kevin Grantham wants to get a whole heck of a lot more funding going toward transportation. He wants to reform para. He wants to make the Colorado Energy Office solvent again as long as it's promoting traditional energy. Crisanta Duran wants to work on affordable housing issues. She wants to be able to help people pay for childcare. She wants to increase education funding. Now, she'll say, well, transportation funding is a priority, but it's usually about 6th or 7th on her list of things that come up there. Only the idea of expanding rural broadband was on both of their lists when just asked the same question here. And even when you get those ideas out there, they're so different. For example, on the para issue, Republicans in the Senate say, we want to go beyond just giving it more money and to say, maybe we should switch this from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan for new enrollees. Democrats yesterday said, no, we won't even consider that idea. On transportation funding, Republicans want to put much of the new funding, including this new funding coming from federal tax reform, to transportation over the next 2 years, saying, look, we have severely underfunded this. Democrats say, oh yeah, we like transportation, but boy, there's a lot of competing priorities here. What this is heading for is a session where you're going to get a lot of arguments and a lot of substantial arguments probably about where the state needs to go. But boy, it is not starting out looking like there's going to be a lot done on some of these key issues. And you pick which one you want as the key issue. But in all likelihood, the Senate Republicans and House Democrats think differently about it.
Patty, it's been a while since we've had lawmakers been able to fight over money, actually be able to spend it. It's usually fighting over where we're going to cut it. Do you think Hickenlooper can craft a compromise, seeing that we still have a split legislature? It's not like anyone is running big majorities here. Can he craft a compromise?
Well, he's sure going to try, because this is a possibility for solving some of the transportation issues. I mean, it's interesting that he's got Grantham, who, at least in theory, is there too. Hickenlooper's a lame duck, but he's also a really good politician. He's still got a lot of savvy people on his staff. So they're going to be working, they're going to be twisting arms, they're going to be trying really hard to solve one of the long-running problems in Colorado. We'll see if the legislators can put aside their election year concerns about the different positions they're going to have to take in order to keep their seats, to do something that'll be really for the greater long-term good of Colorado. It's going to be a wild legislature, though. I think traffic jams on the transportation issue.
David, wrap it up for us. What are we going to see at the legislature this year?
Well, last session it ended in the final days with a big budget bill that violated the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, negotiated by Grantham and Duran, and clearly Duran won that. That wasn't a 50-50. It wasn't a 60-40. He caved and got a few things out of it. He'd be in a better position this year in negotiations if he hadn't been such a milquetoast and also violated his oath to protect the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. As Eric says, PARA is taking the state off a fiscal cliff, and it's the people who are going to suffer most immediately are going to be the state workers who in the future are going to be retired, and there's not going to be the money to pay them these promises that are just promises in the air for their pensions. They'd be a lot better off if, with a defined contribution plan, like an IRA or a KEO plan, it would be their own money that they could keep, and they don't have to worry about whether the state budget is balanced, to know that they're going to have their money for their retirement.
And a quick follow-up, did I hear correctly with some of the reports that it was the bill that passed with the hospital provider fee last year that enabled the federal tax reform increased revenue to not be refunded back to taxpayers but actually be spent by lawmakers?
Exactly, to deprive the taxpayers of their choice to vote on it. And Grantham would be better off to say, well, let's ask the voters to keep it, and we'll ask them for something that they know they want, like transportation, rather than Duran's program of throwing more money into programs that might not have as much popular support.
It's going to be a spicy session. Let's get to our favorite part of the show for the first time in 2018, Disgrace of the Week. And as always, Ms. Calhoun, please start us off.
Well, certainly the tragedy of the week, the New Year's Eve shooting of Deputy Zachary Parrish. Right as we're taping this, the funeral procession is going on. An incredibly sad situation for not just him and his family, but other law enforcement officials. And we still don't know everything that went down, but we certainly know that a person who is as troubled as this shooter was should not have left the VA hospital in Wyoming the way he was allowed to. And somehow people should have been more on notice of what they were getting into when they responded to what apparently was a domestic violence call, but there's still a lot of mysteries there. Undeniable tragedy in any case.
David, your Disgrace of the Week.
The hooligans who showed up at the home of Senator Cory Gardner in Yuma, Arizona at midnight on New Year's Eve, trespassed on his property, screaming, all that. It's fine to have political protest, but people who have any sense of dignity or respect for other human beings don't behave like that.
Eric.
I don't often get to correct David, but I know he meant Yuma, Colorado here, and not
the very occasional David Koppel typo, yes.
Exactly. It happens so rarely I had to jump in there. I'll just give you two names, Donald Trump, Steve Bannon. They deserve each other.
Ed.
I'm going to follow up on what Patty said, but I want to focus in on the fact that the Douglas County shooter walked away from a mental health facility and also refused several efforts to get him back into mental health treatment. This is the same thing we heard about the Sandy Springs, Texas church shooter in November as well. At this point, we are seeing a constant thread of mental health being a link between these shootings. If we're serious about stopping these, we've got to give the resources to the mental health system to keep these people under lock and guard, and we've got to make sure that they're easier to confine when experts say they shouldn't be out in society.
Time to see something nice, Patty?
Yeehaw, the National Western Stock Show is back where it's been since 1906. We've got this huge billion-dollar project coming down the pike that will completely remodel that complex, completely change that part of Denver. We're hoping for the best with that, but in the meantime, get out and enjoy yourself if you can get there up Brighton Boulevard.
That's a good point. I was stuck there this morning. That's incredible. Holy smokes. David.
Further yeehaw. Colorado men's basketball team last night defeated number 4 Arizona State after they were down by 12 points and came back to win the game by 9 against one of the best teams in the country.
Hear, hear. Eric.
It's hard to find much with President Trump to praise, and it's hard for me to do so. But I have to say, on Iran, he's closer to correct on his approach to what is going on in Iran with a developing or massive protests at a minimum and maybe a developing revolution than was his predecessor, Barack Obama, who really turned a complete deaf ear back in 2009 to the uprisings in Iran. So on this one, I'll give him some points.
Ed.
If you're not heading to the stock show this weekend, head up to Breckenridge, where Laura and Bill Lodge have turned the Big Beers, Belgians, and Barley Wine Festivals into one of the best festivals in America. They continue to evolve it. It's going to be a fun weekend with a lot of good people up there.
That is all the time we have for this edition of Colorado Inside Out. As always, log on to Facebook or Twitter for our CIO segments, both past and present. You can also find our podcast on iTunes and Google Play. I also want to thank all of you, our viewers, for making our big 25th season last year so special. We've heard from many of you, and we are grateful for your support. And here's to the next 25 years. And speaking of that, if you missed any of our finales last year, both our look back on 2017 and our look ahead at 2018, which featured our good friend and past host Peter Boyles, be sure to check him out at cpt12.org. For everybody here at Colorado Public Television, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night. Is petitioning on or going through the process?